Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming back on the show, listening in and enjoying our guests and my episodes. Today, I have a really fun guest, Dr. Scott Kachlany. And apparently, I might have said that already.
Yeah, it's Dr. Kachlany, Dr. Nobody, but that's okay. That's okay. You got my first name correct, and that's the important part. So,
I knew I was going to mess it up, but
yeah, thanks.
I can't fix it. I can't fix the way I speak.
That's okay. You don't need to.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Well, moving forward, it's going to be Scott. So I feel safer now.
Yes.
But I appreciate Scott being on. And today we're going to talk about his life and some cool things that he's done, like starting his own company. And we're going to focus on entrepreneurship. But before we do, let's get into it and learn a little more about Scott. Scott, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. And thank you, Dr. Nobody, for having me on. This is exciting, especially as someone who's sort of a little older than you and not been invited into many podcasts to date. So this will be fun, and I do appreciate it. So I was born in Miami, Florida, actually, and grew up in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale area, and never saw snow actually until I went to college. And of course, where did I go to college? Cornell University, Ithaca, one of the colder places in the country, and loved the snow. And I remember the first time it snowed. It was Halloween actually, and it was about 7 or 8 inches of snow up there. And I had shorts on, a t-shirt, and I ran around my dorm yelling and screaming because I was so excited to see this white stuff, powder, falling from the sky, which I had never seen before. Everybody thought I was crazy, but I still love it. I'm still up here in New Jersey, as you know. Then from Cornell, I went to Columbia to get my PhD. I studied microbiology at Cornell, loved it there. Studied microbiology at Columbia as well, got my PhD in microbiology. After that, I started my faculty position at Rutgers University School of Dental Medicine. That was back in 2003. And now I'm there as a professor of oral biology, where I teach microbiology to dental students and graduate students. And I have a research laboratory as well. And the discoveries that I made in my research laboratory about 15 years ago led to the company that I founded called Actinobac Biomed. And we can talk more about that. But basically, I realized early on that when you make a discovery in an academic laboratory, it's great for academic research and basic research, which I love. I love working with bacteria, doing experiments. But if you really want to get that technology and that invention, that discovery into the clinic, into the hands of patients to help these patients, whether it's a therapy or a device, whatever it might be, you need to go into industry, and you need to either license it to industry, have a big pharma company take it and develop it and get it into the clinic, or I learned the hard way, you have to do it yourself. And that's why I actually started the company, not because I started out thinking I'm going to start my own company. I'm going to start my own company. Not at all. It was really after I tried pitching the idea or licensing the idea, selling the idea to the pharma companies, that I realized after rejections, okay, if nobody else is going to do this, I'm going to do it myself because I believe in it so much. And that's basically how it happened in a very large nutshell.
Yeah, that's good. I do pitching in my company, and I can't imagine how that felt to be pitching to pharma companies and being rejected.
Yeah,
probably doesn't feel good.
No, and I was so excited at first because initially we had really great data. We had data even in monkeys. We had tested this compound that we were developing called Leukothera. We were testing it in monkeys and animals. And, in academic research, as you know, you don't usually test things in monkeys. You start with mice and rats, and, maybe you include them once in a while, a monkey, maybe 1 in 100 labs, for some reason, if you work on something that's specific for, humans or monkeys. But most researchers will never test anything in monkeys. And I thought, well, we have great data. Monkeys are similar to humans, etc. And I thought, we're going to license this to Merck or Pfizer or a big company for $1 billion, and I'll be on my yacht in the Mediterranean somewhere in a year or two. And, I don't have a jet ski yet, so far away from that. But But I realized when you go to these pharma companies and they turn you down, you keep thinking, what else do I need? What else do I need? And I learned that the pharma companies want human data. They want you to have data for your drug or your diagnostic or device or whatever it might be. They want it tested on humans or in humans because they don't want to assume the risk. They'd rather interact with you, acquire you or license the technology or partner with you much later in the game when you have de-risked it. And that means testing it in humans and showing at least some safety data. Otherwise, they have to basically start from the beginning. And pharma companies don't want to do that. So the goal of the company that I founded called Actinobac Biomed became to obtain basically human data with our drug. And that's been our focus. That's been our direction throughout this development phase.
Hmm. So before we go deeper into that whole process, I just want to take a step back in what you were saying before, and it's just so that the listeners can understand that you're just a human, just like us. You're not famous yet, so that's
Not
why I
yet.
got you on this podcast. I'm sure if you were famous, you would have said no.
I charge you.
Yeah, that's true. I don't have a yacht either. I don't think I ever will have one, but yeah, maybe I can buy it from you or take it from you when you're done with
You
it.
borrow it.
Yeah. Okay. So in your story, you talk about snow with,
Yeah.
is that like a significance for you? Like, is that really like, that's like a game changer, like
I
emotional for
was.
you?
Yeah. I mean, growing up in Florida, and I guess I had taken vacations, but I never really went anywhere on trips. I'd been to New York with my parents a few times, but we never really went, I guess, deep in the winter enough where it had snowed. And I wanted a change in scenery. As anyone knows who's been to Florida, it's hot and humid all the time, but especially in the summer. And I don't think I ever realized how hot and humid it actually was, how difficult it really was because you're just surrounded by it. And when I went to Ithaca, when I went to Cornell, it sort of opened my eyes to a whole new world. There's change of seasons, the leaves change colors. The snow, I still think the snow is beautiful. It's of course a pain in the butt to have to drive in it and shovel it now that I have a house and whatnot. But especially when you're in college, you just have to walk around. I still have these beautiful memories of walking to class and just looking at my surroundings. It didn't matter that it took me 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get to class. It was always different. And yeah, that was just an amazing experience for me. And I learned how to, I took PE classes. Cornell was great because they have these sort of extreme or crazy PE classes you can take, not just running or working out, but I took skiing actually as a PE class. We went skiing every Friday night up to the mountains, and we took a bus there, and it was just great. You come back Friday night, late at night, you get pizza and hot chocolate you drink. I took hockey and ice skating classes. I learned how to ice skate. I did all these winter sports that I had never done, and I loved it. I bought skis, I bought ice skates. And so it was, a significant event in my life, and not just the snow, but the whole sort of experience, at Cornell for the environment as well, not just the education. It really is. After being to so many different campuses in this country, I still think, and of course I'm biased, but I still think it's the most beautiful campus, I've ever been to. And I think people who've gone there will tell you that, even if they haven't gone there for college, but they visit it. They'll tell you the same thing. And that had a very significant impact on me. And I still use that campus as sort of the standard to compare other places, parks, and, places I go to, colleges or whatnot after that.
When you decided to go to college, did you know you wanted to do, microbiology, or did that come through, as time progressed?
I did. Actually, I knew I was one of the rare species who, I am human, but I might, I'm sort of a subtype. I think I'm a rare species that actually knew that I wanted to study bacteria, not just microbiology. I knew I wanted to study bacteria. And the reason was that, I always loved science. I always built things. I always experimented, played with, the tools in my dad's garage. So I knew I was probably going to do something sciencey or engineering. And when I was in high school, my biology teacher brought in some pond water, and he had a microscope set up. and we were looking at the pond water under the microscope. And I just remember being amazed and fascinated at what I was seeing. All these different cells were moving around, and some were large, some were small, some were rod shaped, some were spherical, and some were spirals. And I literally could sit there and look at it, look through the microscope for hours, and it's one of these things where you don't realize that time is passing, because you're enjoying it so much, and you move the lens a little bit, and you get a new view, a whole new sort of world that you're opened up to. And for I don't remember, maybe my 14th or 15th birthday, I asked my grandma to buy me a microscope for my birthday, like a good microscope, not a Toys R Us microscope, but an actual scientific microscope,
That was my microscope.
Yeah. And I started out with that, but, I said, what, I had a Fisher Science catalog, right? Fisher Scientific catalog. Wow. And yeah. And I think I probably stole it from school from my biology teacher. He had it on the desk, and that's where they ordered things from. Right. So, and it was a binocular microscope, with the oil immersion lens, so it was a step up. It was a real academic microscope. And I even, this is funny, but, at the time you could order bacteria to a house. Now you can't order bacteria, it's all biohazard, and it's special, licenses and authorizations and whatnot. But at the time you could actually order, bacteria to your house. So there was a catalog that I found, and I had my dad order it. He had a company, a machine shop. He's a machinist, engineer. And I had him order it, I think to his company maybe, or to the house. I don't remember. And we, it was a tube of bacteria, it was E. coli. And we kept it in the refrigerator, next to the eggs and whatever else is in the tube. And I actually used that broth, that liquid with the bacteria in it, to look at the cells every night, with the glass slides. And I loved it. I even built a little incubator in my bedroom, out of tiles. And so what I did was I knew, it had to heat up to 37 degrees Celsius, right? Body temperature. And I wired a dimmable light on top of the tiles. Chipped away the tiles to make like a hole on top. And I used a dimmable light that I wired on top, so you could dim it, right? You can make it darker or brighter. And I marked it where it was the right, brightness to result in 37 degrees Celsius. So I sort of played around with it, and if it was too bright, it was too warm, and I dropped it. And I had that in my room. I assembled a box basically out of tile. Imagine that, 1 square foot tiles, right, that are assembled into a cube. And somehow I had a door that opened. I think I probably used duct tape to open, to have it open. And I had this light on top, and I actually grew bacteria in plates and petri dishes. I remember borrowing petri dishes from my school, my high school, and pouring media and stuff. And so I was growing bacteria in my room, and looking at cells. I mean, I didn't get sick, I don't think, but it was exciting. I loved it. I loved experimenting. And when I went to Cornell, one of the first things I did when I got to campus was I sought out a research laboratory to work in. And I went to the microbiology department, and I got their brochure. It's before the internet, really, or just as the internet was starting, but nobody was really using it. It was 1993. I started college. And I got the brochure on the department research and the faculty. And I found a faculty member, Dr. Bill Giorsi, who was actually the chairman at the time, had pictures of bacterial cells. And he was probably one of the only people in the department who was using a microscope. And I thought, this is where I want to be. He's using a microscope. I want to use a microscope. And I went right to him, and I used, through his lab, I learned how to use the electron microscope, laser scanning microscopes, all different kinds of microscopy techniques. And I was there for 4 years, actually. I was in his lab for all 4 years. And I stayed every summer at Cornell to work in the lab. So I feel like I almost got a PhD, through my undergrad. I was there. Yeah. I was there for longer than many of the graduate students, put it that way. Wow. So I really became an integral part of the lab. So yeah, so I knew throughout I wanted to study bacteria. I didn't know what I would specifically do or details, what microorganism I would study or what mechanism or system I'd study per se, but I knew I wanted to be able to study, understand, manipulate these, beautiful little creatures called bacteria.
now I understand why we got along all those years
And I know I'm
because
crazy.
yeah, I didn't know you were so crazy, but I am just as crazy. You definitely beat me 100%. Like I knew from the beginning, and the listeners will know from my other episodes when I talk about my life and my career is I started young too, all the way in junior high and then high school's AP teacher. But I definitely didn't go as crazy as you did, but it makes me feel better
Yeah,
knowing that
yeah, yeah.
somebody else was as crazy and nerdy and weird
Uh-huh.
as I
Uh-huh.
was. Maybe like when obviously our ages when you
Yeah.
told
10 years
your
old.
college, yeah, I
Right.
didn't say anything. I was like, yeah, I won't say anything. But
You got the date. You can work backwards and figure out the age. But well, you took the safer route. You didn't build any dangerous electrical equipment, and
yeah,
not sure even. I'm not sure in. I don't know even how I did it back then, or I wouldn't even do it now. I'm afraid of like electrical, because I'm like I'm gonna get electrocuted. But I didn't
yeah,
care back. I was wiring things, using the black tape to split wires, and if I had known what I was doing, I probably would not have done it. I was just, happy go lucky, but it was fun. I love doing it. I love building. I love building things around the house. And
yeah. That's cool. I definitely I don't have any calluses on my hand. I'm definitely not a handy person, nor do I touch electricity too. I
yeah,
couldn't even figure out to put on the ring for my doorbell. I
yeah.
had my uncle who's an electrician do it, and he did it with his hands. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Don't
aren't you
touch it.
supposed to be
Yeah,
wearing gloves? Yeah, like
yeah, yeah,
he's
yeah,
just
yeah,
touching. It's like 2 volts or something really
yeah, yeah,
low. Like it's like a tingle, and I was really embarrassed about it. But it's fine.
yeah, yeah.
It's fine.
I get it.
Your Cornell experience, the man's that I didn't hear the name, but his lab. Do you feel like he mentored you and really helped you prepare for graduate school and future? I mean, it
Yeah,
seems like he did.
yeah, for sure. So, William Giorsey or Dr. Bill Giorsey, Bill, we called him. Yeah, for sure. He was he was a more hands off professor, and as you know, there are some faculty who are in there all the time and looking over your shoulder, and then there are people who you meet with once a week, and you tell them what happened and your ideas, and they sort of give you an interpretation, and then they let you go back and attack the problem again. And that's how he was, and I liked that because I like problem solving. That's how you learn. And so he was there enough of the time, or he was, there for as a mentor or advising you just the right amount of time, um, so that you could still develop those skills of independent thinking and independent studying. And so, I like the idea of being able to come up with my own hypotheses, come up with my own solutions. Here's what happened. Here's what I think went wrong. And then he would sort of, suggest other ideas or think, yeah, you're on the right path, or why don't you try this? So it was the right amount of sort of mentoring. But I think even just as important was not just him there being the mentor and teaching me, but the lab experience. I mean, that was just unbelievable. It's priceless to be in a lab because not only are you learning the practical side of biology and whatever you're studying, but you're developing these relationships, these friendships, and interactions with other people in the lab, the technicians, the graduate students, the postdocs, and you're learning about life as a scientist and as a researcher, which is what I knew I wanted to go into. And so it was a great experience, academically and socially, especially because I stayed there. As I mentioned, I stayed there every summer. So in the summers, we'd go to the lake and hang out. I've been to graduate students' weddings. They in the woods in Ithaca. We gone to the waterfalls. We went wine tasting in Cayuga Lake, the vineyards there. And I don't drink, so I was the driver. With all the whole lab. We went to the lab manager's house who has horses. And it was just that's as much of a memory of my Cornell experience as classes were, in my dorm and things like that. So I think it's just invaluable. If you're in research, if you're in biology or chemistry or, in the sciences, if you can get into a laboratory and get that experience, not just for the sake of getting it on your resume, for 6 months or a year and then leaving, going to something else, but actually delving into that experience. And I knew that's what I wanted. I didn't want to just have, some people want 4 labs, so they have experience, 4 different professors they work. No, it's more about quality than quantity. I'd
Mm.
rather see somebody, my own lab, I'd rather hire a student who was in the lab for 3 or 4 years with the same person who has a really strong letter than someone who jumped around and was in 3 different labs. So it was, yeah, an amazing experience. I couldn't imagine being in another lab or working with other people. And I really, you know, um, loved and appreciate the time that lab and the members of that lab spent with me. So,
Yeah, that sounds pretty freaking awesome. That sounds
yeah,
like a
it
very
was.
unique experience and
It was.
definitely set you up for not just in terms of like your scientific career, but just having fun and your mental health. And
Yeah,
that sounds
absolutely.
awesome.
I got to appreciate the environment there because, I think as you know, it's extremely cold in the winter and during classes, you can't get out and do much. But in the summertime, it's just beautiful. And
Mhm.
I had a garden actually in a community garden plot. I rode my bike, there every day, and it was just a wonderful time to be in. And I think it's a wonderful time to be in college. And I think anybody who's in college should probably experience that because all too often students, kids run home and they run back to college and they run home and,
Yeah.
like enjoy it, appreciate that environment. So
Yeah. That's really good advice. I definitely support that view.
yeah,
Um, so when after you finished your college career, you go straight into doing your PhD? You knew you wanted to do a PhD?
right. So I again was one of the unique people probably who went right to graduate school, right to get my PhD. Some people do take time off. Either they need to take more classes or they're not sure of what they want to do. Do they want to, backpack in Europe for a year or they don't know if they want to do research or science or medicine or, but I knew I wanted to go into research and get my PhD and interviewed at a bunch of different places and settled on Columbia. I had spoken to, so during the graduate school interviews, you speak to faculty at different schools. And one of the most important things about graduate school, unlike maybe undergrad, is not so much the name of the school. Of course, that's important, and your reputation of the school, I should say, but more is whom you will be working with, right? Is that a lab you want to work in? Doesn't matter where they're at. Is that a lab, research topic you're really interested in? Is that a professor you could see yourself working with for the next 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever it might be? And so that was something I really focused on, was talking to people at each school whose research I was very interested in, focusing on certain bacteria and what the bacteria studies entailed. And I talked to somebody at Columbia, Professor David Figursky, Dr. David Figursky, who was in the microbiology department there. And he was probably one of the few faculty who was just as enthusiastic as I was. I mean, I remember sitting in his office and, it was like, oh my God, look at these bacteria. Oh my God, look at these bacteria. We were going back and forth until we were both like, okay, we have to calm down. It was that sort of, you could probably imagine me like that.
Yeah.
And, I was showing him electron micrographs of bacteria and he was saying, well, we want to look at, here are electron micrographs we took of our bacterium and we want to study this. And I said, I know how we can do that. And it was almost like you just fall into that, it falls into your lap, that made for you type situation. And that's what it sort of was. And I was very excited about the project. I was studying a bacterium that we still study. It's a bacterium known as Aggregatibacter actinomycetium comitans,
Nice.
which is a bacterium, right? We call it AA for short. It's a bacterium found in the mouth. And I was really excited about what kind of work we could do with it. There was very little known about it at the time. And it was going to be my role, my job as a graduate student to figure out how to manipulate it genetically. No one had done that yet. So that's basically how it started. And it led to a lot of discoveries, as you can imagine, when you have something that is not well studied, led to a lot of discoveries that has resulted in, my academic research now and formation of the company, Actinobac Biomed, actually.
Yeah, I can definitely say I will never be able to say that name of the bacteria.
It's
Even when I
okay.
was at Rutgers, I
When
could
you're there,
never.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you brought up one point, and it's come up several times in other interviews, and it's about where you go for school and what you do with it. Because
Good question. Yeah.
when people hear Cornell and Columbia, those are Ivy League top tier schools. And yes, you are definitely smart, but necessarily people may not be able to get into those schools. So what advice would you tell people that maybe not necessarily can get into those type of schools?
Yeah. So I think, yes, it's important to go to the best school possible. I always tell people, go to the best possible school you can, because it will make a difference. I think, undergrad, people will say undergrad is important to get into grad school, right? Or get into professional school. If you want to go to medical school, go to a good undergrad, do well. But, I think the most important part is to do well in your undergrad career. Do well, do the best you can in college. And I'm on the admissions committee for the graduate school at Rutgers. So I see students from all different places, right? And we don't put so much emphasis on the school they went to, as long as it's a good school, right? I mean, any 4-year accredited university in this country, in the U.S., it's going to be a pretty good school. Any state school, any private school, and what we look for is how they did in that school, right? How they did in classes there. What classes did they take, and how did they do? And did they do research? And what was that quality of research? And quite frankly, we'd rather take a student who may have gone to a state school, let's say, who got all A's and worked in the lab for 3 or 4 years and has a great recommendation letter from that professor, saying how amazing they are, how reliable they were, how intelligent they are, than a student who may have gone to an Ivy League school and got B's and C's, and who may not have done much, or the last year they were there, last semester, they decided they do research and they worked in a lab for 3 or 4 months, and then they decided to go to grad school. You have to be that person who's going to want to do research and go to grad school. It's not enough to just sort of go through the motions. And you can see that. You can see the level of interest and enthusiasm. And so what I would say is go to the best possible school you can, do the best you can, and take the initiative and seek out opportunities. The opportunities are not going to come to you. Remember, there's thousands of students probably on your campus. Nobody's going to come around and cater to you and offer you things. I mean, I went to that professor myself when I got to Cornell. Nobody told me what to do. I was probably a little crazy for doing all this because I was a freshman, and people's eyebrows raised a little bit when they're like, well, we never had a freshman in this class, or we never had a freshman do this, but nobody told me no. That's the beauty that was the great part about Cornell, going back to Cornell, of course, but that was the great part, was nobody told me no. It was just like, well, I guess we'll figure it out, and then it was up to me to figure it out or help them figure it out. And it's because I took the initiative. I wanted to do all these things. And so I sort of, created new roads that may not have been there before. And that's what it takes. And I don't think anything will stop you. In college, if you're interested in somebody's research, email them, go knock on their door. Maybe it'll be a no. Maybe you have to talk to 10 faculty before you find one who's going to say yes. But don't give up, and don't let the rejection keep you from moving on. And there's a saying in academia that says, if you're in academia, be prepared for a life of rejection, because that is what it is. You write a grant, you get rejected. You write a paper, it gets rejected right away. Anything you apply for, awards and things like that, promotions, you're rejected before you succeed. And that's how it is from the beginning. In fact, so starting from college applications, right? But don't let that deter you at all, because you need to fail before you are going to succeed. So I think that's my, so you don't need to go to an Ivy League school. You don't need to go to top school. I think, you can go to a good school, do well, then apply to the Ivy League school. And I guarantee you, the Harvard, the Princeton, Cornell, Yale, they'll be happy with a straight A student who came from a good school, that has a student who has a great recommendation, from a professor who's highly respected in that field.
Well, I could definitely cross off one of my questions, and you went into it, which is what you look for in students that apply. But what I want to maybe follow up with that is, it seems like a lot of the points that you're saying is about being proactive.
Yeah.
That some of these students need to be proactive with what they're doing on campus and whatnot. But is that necessarily, like, in order to be proactive, you need to know what you're going to be doing? So what about the students that don't know what they want to be doing yet?
Mm-hmm. Right. Good point. Well, I think they need to explore and find what they want to do. One of the criticisms, I guess, I have about the education system in this country, not that I know what it is in other countries, but I can, tell you one of the problems I have, or one thing that sort of gets me upset or disturbs me, is that there's this idea of like, don't worry, you can figure it out later. And yes, you can figure it out later. But I see too many students who are figuring it out after they finish college. And in my opinion, and in my expectation, as it always was, is that college is supposed to allow you to figure it out. And you should be able to take courses that you're interested in and explore. And okay, maybe it's not going to be what you find in freshman year or sophomore year, but you should start focusing. And sometimes, we get students who come into grad school who really haven't had much biology, or they seem to not know what they were doing and still don't know what they were doing. And it's sort of like, well, what were you doing for 4 years? And I know there are a lot of liberal arts colleges and they take all these courses and whatnot, but at some point you have to focus. Even some of the grad schools are less focused than I think they should be. And let's face it, in life, you're going to focus on something. You're going to, not that you're going to lose interest in other things, but you're going to study something, you're going to focus on something, you're going to work on something. And I think you need to. I don't think it's okay, and I know there's a lot of criticism. There will be criticism against what I say, but I don't think it's okay to be just completely up in the air about everything when you go to college. I think you need to develop an interest even before that. And I think there's this idea of, well, it's okay, and you're allowed to just not know what you're doing. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit hard nosed, in this way, or old fashioned. But I think that you should be exploring even sooner, and you should be, focused, so you can figure out what you need to do to get to that goal. Otherwise, as you say, you don't know what the goal is. So how do you know what you want to do? But be that as it may, I think you then need to sort of go around campus and explore those opportunities, join clubs, talk to faculty. If you don't, maybe you want to do finance, maybe you want to do business, talk to different people. And, I had a friend in college when I got there as a freshman. He said, he's a very smart kid. And he said he doesn't know what he's going to major in yet, but he's taking biology, chemistry, and physics. And whatever he does best in is what he's going to major in. That's not what you should do. And I also hear a lot of students say, well, I'm not going to do as well in that class, so I'm going to drop it, or I'm not going to do it. My feeling is, do you want to take that class? Are you interested? Is that something you want to do? Then take it. That shouldn't deter you from doing it. I mean, I did better in my organic chemistry class than my microbiology classes. Even though I wasn't a chemistry major at all. I beat out all the pre-meds, and I got one of the top scores in the class of 600 students because I loved it so much. I really loved the problem solving of organic chemistry. I loved microbiology too, but it was just a different subject. And I didn't do as well in microbiology as I did in some of the other subjects. I didn't say, hey, I'm not getting, A's in all my micro classes. Let me switch. So I think you have to set your goal. And if you really love it and it's what you want to do, make it work. Don't give up just because you do well on an exam or something. That's not life. You need to go after it. And, don't change your career because of that. Change the way you study, or change the way you get to it rather. And that's, again, I think students nowadays are just not as focused as they should be. That's, or not as clear about a future path. And society accepts it and says it's okay to not know. And I disagree. I think you need to know.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% and totally support everything you say. When I do counsel students and I talk to them, even my brother, he goes to the same school I went to, and I talk to students like that. I give them the same advice you do. I think they're all ultimately wasting their time not doing anything. Like, they're just going through the motions to finish school, but then what? Like, what's the ultimate goal? What's your end goal? You need to give yourself purpose in order to give yourself drive. And that drive will help you do more things and be excited and motivated. And I feel like maybe there's a study out there that shows that students who knew what they were doing going into college versus kids that don't do better. I don't know. That's like a good hypothesis. But anyway, I totally support your views. So moving along now, let's if you can give us like because I know your project and I know how complicated it could get, but now we're going to go into your PhD, what you did, and then go into the actual company. Can you give us the elevator pitch of your research?
Right. So, yeah, perfect. So I studied bacterium that's in the mouth, as I mentioned, AA. And this bacterium basically produces a protein, so a molecule that it produces, that is able to kill certain white blood cells, human white blood cells, animal white blood cells, dog white blood cells, mouse white blood cells. And you might wonder, why would this bacterium produce this molecule that can kill white blood cells? Well, imagine a bacterium in the mouth or in our body has to remain there. And what, of course, do we have to try and get rid of bacteria is an immune system, right? So we have these white blood cells that are coming out to attack the bacterium and try and kill it. So it's this battle, right? It's this constant battle. And bacteria and, all organisms in our body, if they want to stay there, they need to have mechanisms of defense. They need to have ways of evading that host immune response. So while we can't really ask the bacterium to answer for us, but we believe, as scientists, we believe after studying the molecule and the bacterium, that the protein, which is scientifically called leukotoxin, and through the company we trademarked it Leukothera, so I may use both words, but this protein called leukotoxin that the bacterium makes is allowing the bacterium to evade that host immune response by killing off some of the white blood cells, right? So it's a perfect, perfect mechanism. Now, we learn in the lab, through my academic laboratory, we learn that this protein, leukotoxin, is able to kill certain types of white blood cells. It doesn't just kill everything, otherwise we'd be dead, right? And a pathogen or a bacterium in the body never wants to kill the host. It never wants to kill us. It wants to be transmitted from one host to another. So it wants to, make us just a little bit different or a little bit sick, maybe not even sick, but manipulate us a little bit so it can grow inside of us. And then it wants to get transferred to the next person, right? And it wants to do that, in life. And that's how it expands and evolves. So that's the bacterial, goal. We learned how to use this protein to kill these certain white blood cells. And certain white blood cells that the protein kills are known as activated white blood cells. And it turns out that these types of white blood cells, these subtypes of white blood cells that are activated, are also involved in diseases such as leukemia and lymphoma, as well as all of the autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. So autoimmune diseases like psoriasis and allergic asthma and rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. All these diseases are basically diseases of the immune system, right? Even though they're much different diseases, psoriasis affects the skin, rheumatoid arthritis affects the joints, GI, inflammatory bowel disease affects the GI tract. What links all of them together is that it's the immune system that's involved, and the white blood cells in those cases are hyperactivated. They're going a little bit crazy and they're actually attacking the body. So while the white blood cells are supposed to help us, in these cases, they're hurting us. And this is the same thing for leukemia and lymphoma. In leukemia and lymphoma, which are cancers, of course, malignancies of white blood cells, these white blood cells are growing out of control. That's what cancer is, right? Uncontrolled growth. And these white blood cells are growing and causing these cancers. They're crowding out the normal white blood cells. And this is what causes leukemia and lymphoma. Well, it turns out that these are great targets. These diseased white blood cells are great targets for this protein called leukotoxin because it's the same type of cell that leukotoxin wants to kill. So I thought 15 years ago or so, when we were, starting to make these discoveries, I thought, well, let me put two and two together. This sounds like a great therapeutic agent, right? You have this protein here that's very active against killing these white blood cells, and it's very specific for these white blood cells. So what's the goal of any drug? It's specificity, right? Target just the diseased, cells or molecules, and toxicity or action. Get rid of those cells, right? What's goal? The goal of chemotherapy in cancer treatment is to kill those cancer cells. The problem with traditional chemotherapy is that it kills other cells as well of the body, and so you have these horrible side effects. It affects liver cells, kidney cells. Our hair falls out, and that's because it's affecting other systems of the body, not just the cancer cells. So we had this molecule, which is a natural molecule. We don't modify it, we don't engineer it. It's made by the bacterium, and we had this natural molecule that I thought we could use for potential therapy. And I remember thinking, okay, the first thing I have to do is test this molecule, this drug, in animals, right? That's the first thing you want to do, is to see if it works. So we set up an experiment where we administered leukemia cells, human leukemia cells that we can culture in lab, right? A lot of people do this. And we injected these human leukemia cells into mice. And these mice will develop these tumors, okay, or this cancer. Artificial, but it still represents, the human cells, human cancer cells that are dividing in these mice. And then we took some of the mice and we treated them with a buffer, so a negative control, just a placebo. And then the other group of mice we treated with the drug, with leukotoxin. And we asked what happens. And amazingly, even after only a few treatments, a few doses of the drug, of leukotoxin, these tumors went away. And basically, these tumors never returned during the whole duration of the study. And the mice lived full, normal, healthy mouse lives, which is about a year and a half. And we kept these animals going in the animal, facility, and they were happy and healthy and never developed cancer again. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. Before I started the experiment, I thought, well, if it works, great, we're going to pursue this and let's develop this as a potential therapy. If it doesn't work and these mice still die from the cancer, then I'll go back to just streaking bacteria on a plate and growing bacteria in the lab, which I love to do, but that's what I'll do. And when I realized that it worked so well, I thought, wow, we can't ignore this. We have to pursue this. And as I mentioned, I'm a microbiologist by training. I don't usually work with, animals, and I don't do oncology or immunology. But what I've learned, and one of the sort of lessons, is to be able to learn and adapt as you need to. And, I wasn't resistant to it. A lot of people would have said, well, I'm not that kind of scientist, or I don't study this, or I don't work with animals. So I'm not going to, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to turn the other way and keep doing what I'm doing. In contrast, I'm completely opposite. I enjoy the challenge. I want to learn that new field and delve into it and push it, to a point where I want to learn as much as I can. And when I know my limits, I bring in other people. You have consultants and collaborators, and we have a lot of consultants and collaborators in the field. So that's basically how it started. From there, we carried out other studies in other types of for other types of diseases like psoriasis and allergic asthma, dry eye disease, inflammatory bowel disease, leukemia, and lymphoma. And the goal of the company is to first test the drug in patients with leukemia and lymphoma, and then use that human data to then develop other trials for testing in patients with autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, because strategically, getting human data for the leukemia and lymphoma patients will be the most efficient way to move forward there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got to tell you, that was a very long elevator ride. I don't know where, maybe we went up and then back down.
Yeah.
But, no, that was very interesting. So thank you for sharing that. It's pretty remarkable to see something from a lab come out from there and then go now into the process of, the pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. So because it's a different world, just like to your point, like there's these different disciplines that got involved, but this is now a regulatory, body that you're dealing with. Did you get support or advice or mentorship? Like how have you worked around like dealing with the FDA or any regulatory bodies to start this process?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So, in research and in academia, you're never taught about drug development or how to start a company. And I think a lot of companies fail because the founder, the scientist, isn't willing to learn or adapt, as I mentioned, or pivot, as you will. And I love doing that. And I love learning, and I love going to the business meetings and talking to investors. And even though it's not always scientific. And so to answer your question, I learned a lot along the way. I learned the hard way. But I threw myself into it. I threw myself into these meetings and conferences. And yes, you learn a lot and you can do a lot, after you've gained this information. But at some point, you always have to have collaborators and consultants. And especially for what you mentioned, which is a very good point, when dealing with regulatory agencies like the FDA, which is what we deal with all the time. And so we brought in a lot of consultants. So, for regulatory issues, there are rules and guidelines, and there's things that there's no way I would know. There's books and packets that I wouldn't even know where to look for these. And so there are consultants who work with the FDA who know the requirements, and they've been working with us throughout, and they will advise us. There'll be consultants who have expertise in toxicology and pharmacology. There are expert consultants who will advise you on the manufacturing aspects of your drug, how to make it, and what guidelines you need. There are some that advise you on clinical trial protocol, how to design a trial around your drug and the patients you want to go into. And there's no way one person or two people or three people could be experts in all of this. So we have consultants along the way as we need. And we talk to them depending on what we're working on. There was a time when we were talking to them maybe 3 or 4 times a week when we were working on our application to the FDA, and they're essential. And so that's where it comes in. They're telling you, okay, here are the studies you should be doing. Let's see what the data looks like. This is, let's repeat this. And it's a dynamic situation. It's not a one-time call. You figure out what you need to do and let's go back and do it. It's, like I say, it's weekly, daily. Some companies, if you have a lot of funding, you can hire these people, but you'd be hiring a lot of people because initially you don't know necessarily who you need and for how long. Sometimes you need a consultant for 3 months and then you don't talk to them again, right? So it doesn't make sense for a small company to hire people for that short period of time. Yeah. So I think the key to succeeding in a company is to keep your overhead costs down and identify the best possible consultants who know how to get things done. And I think we were lucky that we had some really great consultants. And so there's a lot of interacting with the FDA, and you need people who know how to interact with the FDA and the guidelines and what kind of letters to write to them. There's no way anyone can know all of that. So consultants are the key. Secret weapon. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want you to dig deep on these next 2 questions that I'm going to ask you about the company. In video games, there's these things called like, I wish I knew. All right. And basically the videos are, there's a brand new game comes out and it's like, these content creators make a wish I knew before I started the game. So like, oh, I should have gone left instead of right. Oh, I should have built this and do this. So I want you to think about when you started your company, what are things you wish you knew before starting the company?
Yeah, very good question. So the most important thing I think that I wish I knew, and when I talk to people who want to start companies, I tell them the same thing. You need to know how to make your product, whatever that is. In our field, it's a therapeutic, it's a drug, but whatever it is, whether it's a software app or a device or a diagnostic test, whatever it is, you need to know how to manufacture it under the regulatory guidelines. I don't mean just make it in your garage or make it in the lab, in your academic lab, but you need to know how to produce it at a scale that is relevant for what you will be selling it at or testing it at. And the reason is that whenever you produce something, you manufacture something, and of course I'll use drug therapy or therapeutic molecules as an example because that's what we do. But whenever you make this therapeutic molecule in a laboratory, in an academic laboratory, as we were doing early on, it's at a small scale. You're making it in little 100 ml flasks, right? Little vials, little tubes. And that's fine at that scale because you're testing it in small mice or in certain experiments on your benchtop. But when you want to test this in larger animals or ultimately humans, you need to make large amounts of it. And it has to be made under certain guidelines. It has to be made at a facility that is inspected and approved by the FDA, right? You can't just make it in your kitchen or your garage. And these requirements are very strict and they're very costly. And what I learned was that scaling up and moving your process, even though we had a great process of making this therapeutic agent in our laboratory at Rutgers, moving that process into a big facility, a real company that is just making drugs, just producing molecules, is not so simple. It's not as simple as multiplying it by 100, right? And just multiply everything, all the volumes by 100, and there you go, you have your new process. No, you're going to new machinery, you're using new equipment, you're using new materials, new plastics, new liquids. Everything is different. And I think we take it for granted that we say, oh, I was able to make, this, in my lab, whatever, we'll just scale up and it'll be fine. That's not the case at all. It takes a long time. I'd say the majority of our funding that we have in the company and time was used for manufacturing our drug, not experiments, not testing it, but actually just making it, just getting the raw material. Okay. It's like a chef, spending all their money on just making the food and preparing it and then not having it eaten after, and I think it's, you take it for granted, but we take it for granted, but I think it's a really big point that a lot of entrepreneurs miss out on, and they miscalculate because they think they can do it in 6 months with this amount of money, and lo and behold, 3 years later, and 5 times the amount, more money that they need to actually finish the project. So I think the number one thing I would make sure of, and the reason, especially in drug development, Dr. Nobody, is that, you can't do any of the subsequent experiments. You can't do any of the downstream studies in animals or in toxicology studies or anything unless you have the raw material, unless you have that good material. So it doesn't make sense to jump the gun and start some other studies with other material, other stuff, other compounds, if you don't have that starting material yourself. So first thing you need to do, make the drug, make the product, and then everything will fall into place. And because it's going to take the longest amount of time and the highest cost. So that's my number one suggestion for anybody who is, starting a company. And that's what I wish I knew, because I would have started on day one with the first dollar we got as investment. Not that we screwed around with the money by any means. We did some good studies, but I think I would have waited to do some of the other experiments before we had that high quality, FDA produced drug to do anything else, because that's what took, the longest amount of time.
Well, my follow-up one would be, what's a crucial thing that you need to know going into this? And I feel like that's still the wish and the crucial seems like it's the same thing in this case, unless you could think of something else.
Well, I think the other thing I wish I knew was how long it will take. Nobody can predict that, and I'm not sure
to get your jet ski or to
which I still don't have. So I'm still it's taking a very long time, actually. Yes, to succeed, and there are certain. I think the other thing that I wish I knew was which studies to do or which experiments to do to start off. I think when you start a company, you sort of, your trajectory is sort of at a slow incline. The slope is very low. It's almost a flat line. And then at some point you realize, okay, here's what I have to do, and here's, or somebody advises you, or you realize what you need to do first or next. And then the slope increases significantly, right? And then you sort of climb very quickly. And if I could jump to that point where it starts to increase exponentially, I would have saved several years, right? So, but at the same time, I think and I think anybody will tell you this who's gone through it, you almost have to go through it to know that, I mean, nobody knows how to do it right the first time. Otherwise you would have, right? So you have to learn from your experience. But yeah, I think the other thing is a piece of advice is I think a lot of companies fail because they get investment money, they're excited, they buy an office, they buy a building, they hire 10 people, and then they're out of money. And you have to figure out, what are you going to do with all of these? So in our case, we have never had more than one full-time employee, which may sound silly, but the reason is that employees are very costly. Not that we don't want employees, but they're a commitment and they're very costly. And with a drug company such as ours, any of the work that we do in my academic laboratory, for example, or in another laboratory, doesn't really count. The work that we do ourselves doesn't really count towards the FDA because it has to be carried out, as I mentioned, in a FDA-approved laboratory. So you almost have to contract it out, as you know. So if we hire a PhD level scientist, right, a postdoc or whatever, a PhD level scientist, and they are doing experiments in our offsite laboratory, it's not going to really do much for us because it's not carried out under what's called GLP conditions or good laboratory practice, requirements. So a lot of that work is sort of going to be wasted. And we'd rather take that money and pay a company to do the work under their conditions, which will end up in the application that goes to the FDA, or hire a consultant to help us, do the work, and you pay them much lower rate. So again, that's, I think, how companies fail, and they go through money very quickly. We've been able to burn through cash much more slowly by keeping our overhead low and selecting, where the money is spent. Because, like I say, if you're hiring somebody and they're not doing work that's going to actually directly affect your end result, which is getting into humans in a clinical trial, then why do it? It sounds cool. It's exciting, right? We all want to set up a company and we have an office and we have 10 people working for us, but if it's not valuable, if it's not going to get you closer to the clinic, don't do it. And it's hard making that decision sometimes. But.
Well, Scott, I I appreciate the very kind way of telling me that you didn't accept my application in front of everybody. So thank you for that.
You rejected.
Totally rejected live on our podcast. So thank you very much.
But if we get that next funding, if we get the next funding level, we'll reconsider your application.
Okay. Great. I appreciate that. So just a couple more questions here before we wrap up. You've given a lot of great advice for people thinking about starting a company or making a move. Are there any resources that you can let people know about starting a company? Like, if you read or watched or learned anything, or this is all ad hoc as things came up and you learned it on the spot. Like, what was your learning style there?
So I have two parts to that answer. One is two answers to that question. One is I read I read only biographies, actually. So I read a lot, and I only read biographies because I love learning about people. And usually it's celebrities or famous families or entrepreneurs, everything. It ranges from singers to whatever, actors, because I like to learn about what made them successful and what characteristics did they have. What was their character, and what I learned is they all failed miserably early on, whether they were actors or singers, celebrities, whatever they were, entrepreneurs, and they often came from very poor families. Like, it's rare to read about somebody who was wealthy and they became wealthy and they stayed wealthy. These people are hardworking people, and that's what made them successful. And so I love taking what I learned from there and applying it to my own life. And maybe indirectly, maybe I don't even know I'm doing it, but it just allows me to sort of learn about what makes a successful person. And it's always hard work and drive and desire to do it. Yes, there's talent there, and but they didn't start out like that. They still had to practice. They still had to learn. And so I think that's one thing that's helped. I wouldn't say there's any one book, that would do it. But I've read a lot of biographies, and I think I love, and it's real life. I don't like fiction because it's all made up, and I like the idea of, and I know I know I'll get a lot of hate email right now, but I like the idea that that real life happened, and when I read these, sometimes I'm amazed. I'm like, wow, and they're still alive, or that happened. You know what I mean? Because it actually happened. Like fiction, it's easy to write anything that's crazy, because it didn't happen, right? But these people actually lived through these events. So I'm amazed every time I read a new biography. But the other resource is exactly the question you just asked, is what I asked myself, is, where can I go to find out how to do this? And I couldn't really find anything out there for how a professor, starts a company. Now, obviously, there's lots of different fields, and I'm sure there are books about different areas. But I had, over the years of doing this, I've had a lot of other professors come to me and ask me that question. Or people who know that I do this, they say, oh, I know this person who's done this, and they refer someone to me. And so I've had a lot of conversations with other, mainly faculty, who are interested in starting a company. They're like, where do I start? What do I do? Do I patent first? Do I talk to an investor first? Do I go to a company first? I mean, like I said, you're not taught this. It's just out there. And so I decided to write a book actually about this. And so in the
Nice.
last year or so, I've put this all together in a very practical sense of almost, here's what you do, or here's at least what to think about. I mean, everybody's company is going to be different. Everybody's idea is different, but here are the main topics and things such as manufacturing. Make sure you can make your product before you go much further. And once you do that, then here's what you do, and make sure you have a patent. So the practical things that nobody ever tells you. And I have a sort of final version. It's not published or anything, but I sort of just completed it a few months ago. So I don't have a publisher yet. If anybody's out there and wants to look at it, let me know. but
Absolutely.
but that's what I wish I had, was something like that. Someone gave me a guide, and I wrote it also because every time somebody asked me about it, instead of talking to them for a few hours, not that I mind talking to people, but I can just sort of just hand them the book, and say, here, read this, and then let's talk. You'll be farther along, basically, right? I can't tell you everything that's in here because I took a long time to write the book, but so that's my advice. I'm not sure there's any one book. I think the most important property or character you can have when starting a company is enthusiasm, being excited about it, because that will keep you going. That will, you will ignore or be oblivious to the amount of work that's required if you are excited about it. It won't even occur to you that you just spent 5 hours doing something, looking something up or trying to figure out how to do something, if it's something you really love and you want to move it forward, right? The time will just fly. The work will just fly. If it's not something you love, an hour will seem like 10 hours, right? And so that's the most important thing I could say is being excited and enthusiastic about it. And you can see that when somebody's excited, and investors will be able to see that too. And that's what they want to invest in. They want to invest in the person, not just the company. And trust me, they don't want to invest in somebody who's sort of just sitting up there and just doing it as their job. They want to see somebody who's passionate and enthusiastic about it. So
the funny thing during that talk part that you just had, I wrote down if you were going to write a book, and then as I'm finishing writing down that note, you say that you're going to write a book. So I'm glad to hear that.
I read minds.
Yeah, that was a little creepy. I mean, it's another skill set I guess you have.
Yes, I do.
So wrapping up, I have 3 final questions, and one is just you've given us really cool stories, information, and motivated us.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to ask you a personal question: is what do you, with your company, where do you see it going? Like, what are your hopes with this company at the end of the day? What do you plan on doing with the drug, and things like that?
Yeah, great question. So in April of 2021, so recently, just a few months ago, we got approval from the FDA. I'm very excited to say we received full approval from the FDA to test our drug called Leukothera in humans, so in patients with relapsed and refractory leukemia or lymphoma. So these are patients who have failed other therapies. They unfortunately do not have very a long time to live. They're, at the end stage usually. And so this will be their last option, their last therapeutic option. And so my goal is to get this drug into humans as fast as possible, to help patients who are suffering from these deadly and debilitating diseases, and ultimately show through these clinical trials that the drug is beneficial to patients. That's sort of the near-term goal, right? Just, get that human data and convince people that this is worth pursuing. The long-term goal is to either develop it ourselves, if we can keep going through phase 2 clinical trial, phase 3 clinical trial, or partner with another company, a big pharma company, which is often what happens, and have them work with us to develop the drug and get this into the patients who need it. And this would be not just leukemia and lymphoma, but hopefully patients with autoimmune diseases and inflammatory and allergic reaction, allergic diseases as well. So that's my ultimate goal, is to get this into all the patients who I think it will be effective for. And that means all of these white blood cell diseases, basically. So
nice. And congratulations on that. And
I
hope
thank
it
you.
keeps moving along.
Big step.
Sounds very promising. Yeah, it's a huge step.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So wrapping it up here, I always ask the same two questions to my guests. And the first one is what are the best and worst moments in your life or your career that you can
Hmm.
share with us?
Hmm. Well, I think the best is easy. The best, I have to say, I have two kids, so I think them being born, as I think anybody with kids will probably say. Um,
Yep.
as I get older and grow into teenagers, I might, I sometimes regret saying that, but but just kidding. They're amazing, and that's them being born is obviously probably the best thing that's ever happened. But the other non biological event that I can remember in my life is actually getting into Cornell. Partly because this sounds silly, but I didn't really think I would get in. I was a great student. I did very well in high school. I had a lot of activities. I'm not a great test taker. I never have been, and my SATs were not that great. Um, and I still remember the moment that I got in. I remember I was in school, and this is of course before electronic, informing students by electronic email or anything. So we had to wait for a letter, and I knew that the letter was coming, today or tomorrow, one of these days. And I had just finished math class, I believe, in high school, and I went to a payphone again before cell phones. I went to a payphone and I called my mom because I knew she was home and I wanted to see if she got the letter. So I called her and she answers the phone and she said, "Oh, wait, let me get the mailbox." And she went to the mailbox and she goes, "Oh, there's two letters here from Cornell. There's two envelopes." And she goes, "Which one do you want me to open first?" And I said, I don't know. I'm not there. I open whatever. How am I supposed to know? Pick one. Pick one
Yeah.
and open it. And she opened it, and I still remember the words. I still have the letter. Um, and it said, the first line was, "Dear Scott, welcome to the Cornell community." And I just remember being so excited, jumping up and down. I probably left the phone, on the dial tone there. I probably hung up on my mom actually. And I was just so excited, screaming that I got in. And of course, probably wasn't the greatest thing to do because I think there were people who, were finding out from other schools that didn't get in. I was the
Yeah.
jerk who was, overly excited and, by pissing other people off. But that was one of the greatest moments because my parents didn't really go to college, and nobody in my family went to Ivy League schools. Like, it just wasn't in our family. You know what I mean? So being able to go
Mhm.
to this amazing school was just, and I'd been there, I visited it, and it was just breathtaking. I knew I wanted to be there. And one of those rare instances where you really want something so badly and you get it. Sometimes, a lot of times you
Yeah.
compromise. You're like, well, I didn't get it, but it'll be okay. I'll go here instead. And I would have been fine. But like, it's one of these dreams, where you're like, you really want something, and oh my God, it actually happened. So that's an event I will never forget. Actually, it's very clear in my mind. Um, Worst, probably actually my mom passing away a few months ago. Yeah. So I
Oh,
mean,
I'm sorry, man.
yeah, no, it's. I didn't really even realize that in that same story, she's in both places. That
Mm.
she represents probably the best part of my life, and then also the worst part of her being gone. But I think anybody who has lost a parent, especially, will probably understand that. So, but I'm glad she loved Cornell. She visited me with my dad. My parents visited me a lot in Ithaca. They were better friends with some of my friends than I was. Actually, all of my friends knew them at the dining hall. So they loved it up there. And so yeah, so I think that's probably the best and the worst.
Thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah. Of course.
Um, and as you know, I too lost my mom,
Yeah,
recently and stuff like that. So I could definitely, you know,
Yeah, you
I c-
understand.
I understand, and
Yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that. So,
yeah. No, thank you.
uh, so the last question that I like to ask is really to help people, motivate people, and give them kind of like a path at the end of this interview, just like what to start thinking about, what to
Uh-huh.
motivate them. What are five essential things you think they need to succeed in their life or their career?
I think one is find, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, find the passion that you love, be enthusiastic about it. A lot of people might say, well, but you can't make money doing that, or it's not a career. Well, I think if you really love it, you could probably make it a career. And I think a lot of people will tell you that too. It may not be a traditional career or a 9 to 5 job, but you have to do something you really love. Otherwise, you're going to have a miserable time, going through life. But I think the other things that you need, I think, to stay happy or to be successful is a hobby or hobbies, that you can fall back on and that you enjoy doing in addition to work. And for some people, it's one and the same. For me, they overlap in some ways, right? I mean, which is a good thing. But I also have, I garden. I read a lot, as I mentioned. I cook. I love cooking. I love building things. So there are things that are non-academic, I guess. I run, I work out, so those things are essential in your life to be happy. So you have something else to go to come home to feel proud of, right? I enjoy working out because afterwards and then running, I feel like I could eat a lot more, and I won't feel bad about it,
Yeah.
So, if for no other reason, and I think I'm getting healthier too, right? But things like that you need, otherwise you don't feel satisfied with your life, you're content.
Mhm.
I think you also need to surround yourself with people who are successful, and if you can, smarter than you, because they will help you and they will teach you. And you don't want to be the person who's always feels like, oh, I'm teaching these people, or I'm not learning from this. Not that I mean, I love teaching, obviously, but you want someone to teach you at all levels, wherever you are in your career, in your life. You want somebody to tell you what you're doing wrong and what you need to do to get to the next step that you may not be aware of. And I think if you surround yourself with the best people, then you will succeed in whatever you're doing. I think you also have to surround yourself with people who make you laugh. I think that's crucial. Whom you can make laugh. You can have that same effect on the other person. You can make them laugh, because life is too serious too many times, and I think you need to be able to just go out with people and surround yourself with people who are funny, and who make you look at things in a different way, on a day-to-day basis. So I think maybe that's not 5, but those are
You don't have to
probably
do 5.
those are probably some of the essential. If you can hit those, you're going to be successful. You'll be fine. Don't worry. The other 2 you'll figure out. But yeah. So,
Okay. That's fair.
yeah.
All right, Scott, that was such a great interview. You really loaded up my notepad here with a lot of notes. I have to tell
reading.
you, yeah, seriously, I got to say that if people have not detected this episode is clearly sponsored by Cornell. If that's not clear.
I need a building in my name, so make sure you mention me. So yeah, thank you.
Just joking. I don't want to get in trouble. But seriously.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
I definitely know people have gotten there, and it is a nice school.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. I just want to make sure if the listeners can reach out to you through email, if that's okay, correct?
Sure. Yeah, you can provide that to them. And I think I gave you 2 email addresses, Dr. Nobody. Either one is fine. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much, listeners. I really hope you gained plenty of insights today. I mean, for me personally, there's a ton. But this is the beginning of becoming a someone, but specifically the someone you always wanted to be. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please do give me a like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also visit the website, thedrnobodypodcast.com, to learn more about my guests, Scott himself, to listen to his episode again, share the episode, and much more. Thanks again for listening to the Dr. Nobody podcast, where we turn nobodies to somebodies. Talk to you all very soon.